Our readings today pose two questions for us that I think are worthy for us to ponder. When we ask God to answer our prayer requests, are we really ready to hear his answer? And the second is that Jesus teaches his disciples that they should serve rather than to be served. He is the shining example of what it means to be a servant leader. What does servant leadership mean to me? Let's look at that first question. How ready and open are we to listen to God's answer to our request? For when God answers our prayer, and he always answers our prayer, there are consequences in our life. Jesus kindly reminds James and John that consequences resulting from their request will pose significant challenges for them. Can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism which I am baptized? Now, we all probably use much of our prayer life asking God for stuff, right? Okay, God, here's your to-do list for today. And oh, by the way, this is how I want you to fulfill that list. Now, maybe we're not so bold as to ask God that we sit on his right and his left, but we do want him to fix a lot of stuff in our life. And when we ask God to heal us, to fix those things, maybe it's our relationships, maybe we're praying as intercessors for someone else. He's always willing to do that, to answer that prayer. But in doing so, he's always looking out to answer it for our good. For he knows what we need even before we ask. But do we realize how our desired result, how we want God to answer that request, may challenge us in ways we don't expect? Now, a simple example, perhaps from our own life, is how many of us have had the experience of maybe when we were a young child, we went to our parents and we said, Mom, Dad, I'd really like a dog. I want a pet. Oh, I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. And the usually response is, are you really ready to take care of that dog? Are you ready to go out in the rain and the snow when it needs to go outside? Are you going to clean up after it? Are you going to walk it every day? Oh, yeah, Dad. Oh, yeah. Right. That's the challenge we need to think about when we ask God to do something. Because there are consequences to our requests, perhaps even demands. I have some friends of ours who have actually received some pretty miraculous healings. Some of them have prayed for that healing for years before God answered that request. Others, a matter of a day, and they were healed. But in all of their circumstances, in all of those situations, they had consequences that they hadn't anticipated from that healing. People began to question them. Why were you healed and I wasn't? Why you and not me? Their lives had to change in response to the miracle that God performed for them. And that change wasn't easy. It required them to really reflect upon it and to think about how they were going to respond to those around them. The cup they were to drink demanded a response. And that's what we need to think about when we ask God to fix stuff. Even Jesus, who knowingly accepted the cup of his passion and death would bring in order to save us, prayed at that last moment in the Garden of Gethsemane that, God, take this cup away from me. I'm not sure I'm fully capable of accepting it. It's not wrong to ask God to correct stuff, to heal us, to intercede on our behalf. But we need to do so with our eyes open and our wills ready to accept the change that will result. Jesus then challenges his disciples to begin to change their perception about being the greatest. Whoever wishes to be great among you will be your servant. The leader, the top dog, must serve, not be served. Now, Jesus himself is the ultimate example of that servant leader. Paul tells the Philippians, he who was in the form of God did not deem equality with God something to be grasped. Rather, he emptied himself and took the form of a slave. He became one of us. The first and foremost quality of a servant leader is to be intentionally humble. And we see that in Jesus. All of Jesus's actions seek to fulfill one goal: to bring about our salvation, our good, not his. He seeks our good over his glory. And he willingly sacrifices his life in order to save ours. This is the primary characteristic of a servant leader. And this is what Jesus wants us to emulate. Sacrifice through service to others, seeking others' good before ours. It isn't easy, but that's what is meant by the term agape love. To die to our own desires, our own glory, in order to meet the needs of others. So how are we living out that model? I'm sure there are times when we all die to ourselves. But is that the attitude? Is that attitude our actual way of life? Or is it just an occasional incident in our life? How is it that we make sacrifice through service to others habitual? And we do so when we practice intentional humility, when we die to ourselves. Now that's something to ask God for in our prayer, for the grace and the strength to humble ourselves as did Jesus Christ. The consequences of that prayer is eternal life